North Carolina's mountains are beautiful by day, but some roads, forests, and old buildings feel different after dark. Tonight's stories come from the Blue Ridge, eerie encounters near Boone, unexplained experiences at Asheville's Omni Grove Park Inn, and something that may have been watching from the woods, as well as several other haunted locations. These are 6 stories that people who experience them still can't explain. The woman appeared out of nowhere, and the cop said she was never there. The story was shared by Avery H. In February of 2023, Avery and his dad drove up to Boone, North Carolina for an Appalachian State football game and a campus tour. By the time they finished exploring campus, it was already close to midnight, but neither of them wanted the night to end. They decided to catch a late showing of the new Jackass movie before making the drive back to Charlotte. When they finally left the theater, it was nearly 2 in the morning. They headed south on US 321. About an hour into the drive, the world seemed to disappear. There were no houses, there were no gas stations, street lights, or cars. It was just miles of dense Appalachian forest on both sides of the highway. The temperature had dropped into the single digits, and Avery was beginning to drift off in the passenger seat. And then she appeared. An old woman with long white hair and a loose robe suddenly leaped directly into the road. His dad slammed on the brakes. The car swerved violently. They barely missed her. For a split second, both of them saw her clearly. An elderly woman, white hair flowing, almost barefoot, standing in freezing temperatures in the middle of nowhere. As they regained control, they noticed something strange. A police cruiser had been driving not far behind them. Avery's dad immediately pulled over and flashed his headlights. The officer stopped. He walked up to the window and asked, "What's the problem?" Still shaken, Avery's dad said, "Didn't you see that woman? She looked like she needed help." The officer just stared at them. He had no idea what they were talking about. Avery looked through the rear window. The highway was empty. There was no woman, no footprints. There was no movement at all. There was nothing out there. There were no houses for miles. There were no parked vehicles, and there was no place anyone could have gone. And with temperatures in the single digits, surviving outside dressed only in a white robe would have been nearly impossible. His dad wanted to turn around, but Avery said a crushing feeling of dread suddenly hit him. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. He begged his father to keep driving. Years later, he still gets chills thinking about that night on US 321. So what did they see? Some people point to the legend of Spearfinger, a Cherokee shapeshifter said to disguise itself as an old woman to lure travelers into the woods. Others talk about the high country crone, an Appalachian legend of a white-haired witch that appears in front of cars on lonely mountain roads. Some believe it may have been a roadside harbinger, a spirit said to appear just before a deadly accident, forcing tired drivers awake and changing their fate. And nearby legends even speak of spirits connected to the old Green Park Inn. But whatever Avery and his father saw that freezing night on US 321, the police officer never saw her. And when they looked back, she was gone. So, if you have any comments for Avery, please leave them. He will be seeing this video. I'm going to share a link with him. Noah looked through night vision goggles, and something looked back. The person who shared the story wanted to remain anonymous, so we're going to call him Noah. Noah lived in western North Carolina his entire life. His house sat right in front of a stretch of woods, but it wasn't deep in the mountains or miles away from town. In fact, his family lived right in the middle of town, and the woods behind it never seemed particularly dense. As a kid, Noah and his family would hike occasionally through those woods. They felt endless, but he always assumed they couldn't actually be very large. One summer when Noah was in 5th or 6th grade, his extended family came to stay for several days. Since the weather was perfect, Noah and his cousins decided to have a sleepover on the trampoline in the backyard. To them, it felt like camping. As night fell, the entire family stayed outside talking, laughing, and spending time together. That was when Noah's mom brought out new night vision camera or goggles device, some sort of device she had just bought. Everyone took turns looking into the woods for deer or other animal. When it was Noah's turn, he lifted the goggles to his eyes and looked toward the tree line. What he saw immediately terrified him. Standing among the trees were 3 black, shadowy figures. Their bodies were dark, almost blending into the woods, but their eyes appeared bright white. Noah watched as they slowly leaned in and out from behind separate trees, almost as if they were watching everyone in the yard. One by one, they would peek out, then disappear behind the trees, then peek out again. Noah doesn't know how long he stared at them, but he remembers pulling the goggles away and immediately telling his family what he had seen. His mother and uncle looked into the woods. They saw nothing. When Noah looked back, the figures were gone. Nobody believed him, but he was so frightened that he refused to stay outside for the rest of the night. Over the next year, Noah occasionally tried to spot the figures again, looking into the woods at night and hoping to understand what he had seen, but they never returned. Eventually, he stopped looking altogether. Years later, Noah searched online for ghost stories, cryptids, and paranormal accounts that sounded similar to what he had witnessed that night in the woods. He never found anything that truly matched, and to this day he still avoids looking into the woods after dark. So what did Noah actually see peeking from behind the trees in western North Carolina? Old school Appalachian folklore says he might have seen a Hidebehind. This legendary creature is a 6-foot-tall, shaggy black beast from 19th century lumberjack lore. It's famous for being the ultimate hide-and-seek champion. It's so unnaturally slender and fast it can instantly slip behind a 10-inch tree trunk and stay completely out of your line of sight. It loves to stalk people out of pure curiosity, but it hates open spaces. But here's the best part. If you're worried about one watching you, old lumberjacks claimed a foolproof defense. According to camp legend, the Hidebehind absolutely detests the smell of alcohol. Loggers swore that having a few drinks made you completely invisible and unappetizing to them. So if you're out in the woods of North Carolina and you feel like something's watching you from the trees, science says run, but folklore says crack open a beer. Every night at exactly 9 p.m., the kitchen lights flickered until one night, something appeared in the flashes. This story was shared by Jackson. When Jackson was about 11 years old, he moved with his mom and younger sister into his grandmother's rented log cabin deep in rural central North Carolina after she was seriously injured in a motorcycle accident. The cabin sat in complete isolation, surrounded by woods and open fields. The closest neighbor was nearly 2 miles away, and the nearest store was about a 20-minute drive. The remoteness alone made the place feel unsettling. Not long after they moved in, something strange started happening. Every single night at exactly 9 p.m., the kitchen lights would begin flickering. They didn't buzz or dim like faulty bulbs. They switched rapidly on and off over and over again. At first, Jackson's grandmother thought the kids were playing with the light switch, but it kept happening when no one was anywhere near the kitchen. Sometimes the family watched the lights flashing from the living room. Other nights, after everyone had gone to bed, they could see the flickering glow underneath their bedroom doors. Eventually, they assumed it had to be bad wiring. The landlord even sent an electrician to inspect the cabin. Everything checked out perfectly. Nothing was wrong. Yet every night without fail at exactly 9 p.m., the lights flickered like clockwork. After months of it happening, the family almost stopped reacting. It simply became another strange part of living in that cabin. Then one summer evening, everything changed. Jackson, his mother, and his grandmother were sitting around the kitchen table eating dinner, laughing and talking when 9 p.m. arrived. The lights started again, but this time they weren't flickering rapidly. Instead, they turned off, then on slowly, almost as if someone was deliberately standing at the switch, flipping it up and down. The conversation stopped. Everyone noticed something was different. Jackson looked toward his grandmother, who was standing at the counter buttering a piece of bread. Standing directly behind her was a tall shadow. It looked exactly like the silhouette of a man wearing a tall hat. If you've ever seen descriptions of the Hat Man, Jackson says that's the closest comparison, except this figure had no glowing eyes or visible features. It was just a solid black outline. The strangest part was that every time the lights went out, the figure remained visible. It was somehow darker than the darkness around it. Jackson couldn't move. His chest tightened, and an overwhelming feeling of dread washed over him. For what felt like 15 seconds, the lights slowly blinked on and off while the figure remained standing silently behind his grandmother. Then, the light stopped. The shadow vanished. Jackson immediately burst into tears and became hysterical. When he finally managed to tell his family what he'd seen, they didn't dismiss him. Both his mother and grandmother believed him immediately because they had experienced other unexplained events themselves. Jackson never saw the figure again, but the lights continued flickering at exactly 9 p.m. every single night for the rest of the time they lived there, and even after everyone moved out except his grandmother. According to Jackson, there were plenty of other unexplained incidents in that cabin, including cabinets slamming in the middle of the night, furniture being moved while everyone slept, and strange noises coming from inside the walls. But nothing ever matched the terror of seeing that silent figure standing behind his grandmother. To this day, Jackson says that whenever he sees lights flickering, he immediately feels anxious. So what do you think he witnessed that night? Faulty timing, an overactive imagination, or something that only appeared when the lights began to flash? If you have a comment, or if you want to share any information, anything about the Hat Man, or if you've seen the Hat Man, please leave it in the comments for Jackson. I'm going to share a link to this with him. He was convinced it was just a reflection until he found out the hotel was supposedly haunted. The person who shared this story wanted to remain anonymous, so we are going to call him Tyler. Back in 2013, Tyler was traveling with his family from Tennessee to New York when they stopped for the night at the Omni Grove Park Inn in North Carolina. He's always enjoyed paranormal stories, but he's also been skeptical. He'd never experienced anything that made him believe ghosts were real. The next morning, he and his sibling grabbed breakfast before getting back on the road. They found a quiet table overlooking the hotel's massive golf course. When his sibling went back to the room to grab something they forgot, Tyler sat alone staring out the window. That's when he noticed someone walking across the golf course. It looked like a middle-aged man wearing an unbuttoned white shirt, flowing in the breeze, but something wasn't right. The figure looked almost transparent, more like a hologram than a person. Tyler kept moving his head, convinced it had to be a reflection in the glass, but there was nothing behind him that could have created it. The TV overhead was off, no one was nearby, and no one on the course looked anything like the figure. Even stranger, he couldn't make out the man's legs. He watched as the figure continued walking away. Then, a pale rod-like shape swept across it, almost like a windshield wiper, and the figure simply disappeared. Not faded, not walked away, just gone. Tyler convinced himself that there had to be a logical explanation, maybe some strange trick of the light, so he never mentioned it to anyone. Later that day, as they were driving away, Tyler overheard his parents talking to a family friend on the phone. When they mentioned staying at the Grove Park Inn, the friend immediately responded that the hotel had a reputation for being haunted. His parents were shocked. Tyler slowly took off his headphones and said, I think I might have had an experience. To this day, he still doesn't know what he saw that morning. He only knows he's never found an explanation that makes more sense than what his own eyes witnessed. So I recently spent some time in Asheville, and the hotel is not shy about its history. There's information all over the place about famous people who stayed there, including many presidents, and there's even information about the lady in pink. So what we do know is the Pink Lady is the most famous ghost of the Omni Grove Park Inn in Asheville, North Carolina. She was a socialite in the 1920s who stayed as a guest in room 545. She tragically fell 2 stories from her balcony down into the hard slate floor of the Palm Court where she perished. It is unknown the reason behind the fall. But the person Tyler described was clearly a man. So who did he see? Well, what we do know is that F. Scott Fitzgerald stayed at the Grove Park Inn during the tragic, lonely final act of his jazz age story. He lived in rooms 441 and 443 during the summers of 1935 and 1936. This was a period defined by deep depression and creative decline. He came to Asheville solely to be near his wife Zelda, who was hospitalized nearby for severe mental illness. He spent hours isolated in his room, watching wealthy hotel guests arrive desperately searching for writing inspiration. He was battling severe alcoholism, and he tried to quit hard liquor by drinking up to 50 small beers a day. On his 40th birthday, a brutal newspaper expose revealed his struggles to the world, sending him into a dark spiral. The historic luxury stone resort offered peace to everyone but Fitzgerald, who was living through absolute financial and emotional ruin inside the walls. So do you think Tyler saw the ghost of F. Scott Fitzgerald, or possibly another soul who never decided to leave? Please leave your theories in the comments below. I will be sharing a link to the video with Tyler. A rookie deputy answered a church alarm on Halloween night, but he wasn't alone. The story comes from Randy, who worked for a small sheriff's office in the foothills of western North Carolina. Around 1989, the county had been dealing with a string of disturbing incidents. Investigators were finding burned rock circles with pentagrams, signs of animal sacrifice, and local churches being vandalized. Cardboard crosses were being hung upside down on church doors, leaving the community on edge. Then, right at midnight on Halloween, Randy got a call. Someone was ringing the bells at a small mountain church at the end of a lonely gravel road. The department was short-staffed, so the young deputy responded alone. The church sat in complete darkness. No security lights, no nearby houses. Randy later said that if he turned off his flashlight, he could barely see his own hand. With his flashlight in one hand and his service weapon drawn in the other, he approached the front door. It was cracked open about 2 inches. He tried pushing it with his foot, but it wouldn't budge. For a split second, he thought someone was holding it shut from inside. Instead, it was a fake plant wedged behind the door, almost as if someone wanted it left slightly open. Inside the sanctuary, the only things disturbed were the cross and a picture of Jesus praying. Both had been turned upside down. Everything else looked untouched. Randy carefully searched the church before making his way to the basement fellowship hall. That's when he noticed a single kitchen drawer hanging open. Inside was a wooden knife block with a perfectly shaped slot for each knife. Every slot was filled, except one. The large meat cleaver was gone. Randy admitted he was terrified. He slowly backed out of the church, locked the door behind him, hurried to his patrol car, even checked the back seat to make sure no one was hiding inside. He climbed in and immediately locked the doors. He took a deep breath. Then he turned the key, switched on the headlights, and froze. Resting on his windshield, tucked under the wiper blade, was the missing meat cleaver. Someone had been outside while he was inside the church. They could have approached him at any moment. Now, there's no evidence that whoever was in the church that night was connected to the reports of satanic activity happening around the county. Those incidents simply provide the backdrop for Randy's experience. What is certain is that someone was inside or around that church while he searched it, and somehow placed the meat cleaver on his windshield without him ever seeing them. Every story has more than one possible explanation. So what do you think Randy experienced that Halloween night? Was this a calculated scare by someone hiding nearby, or something else entirely? Share your theory below, and I'm sharing a link with Randy. A sheriff's deputy responded to the same haunted mansion hundreds of times, until one night the girl in the third-floor window looked back at him. The story was shared by Randy. Randy grew up in a small rural community in the foothills of western North Carolina. When he was around 13 years old, he'd ride his bike past an old, abandoned, 3-story Victorian mansion. Every single time, his stomach would knot up with dread. He'd pedal as fast as he could until the mansion disappeared behind him. Years later, when he was 18, the mansion had been restored into a historic museum. Around Halloween, a Charlotte TV station even listed it as one of North Carolina's most haunted places. During a school field trip, Randy toured the mansion with a psychic medium. The home's history was unusual enough on its own. It had originally been built as a 2-story home for a wealthy diamond dealer, but he thought it wasn't impressive enough, so he had workers literally saw the house in half, jack up the roof, and build an entirely new floor in the middle. Photos of the construction were still displayed inside, but the strangest part came on the 3rd floor. The psychic suddenly became physically sick and overwhelmed with sadness. She said someone had been held against their will in one particular room for years. Then everyone noticed something unsettling. The doors to that room had locks on the outside. Even the windows had locks on the outside. That discovery left the entire class uneasy. 6 years later, Randy became a deputy sheriff for the county. One call came in over and over again, alarms at the mansion. Not door alarms, motion detectors on the second and third floors. Some nights he'd respond 5 or 6 times. No one ever found an intruder, but almost every time something was different inside. The mansion housed a collection of antique dolls. Deputies would arrive to find dolls lying on the floor after somehow being removed from locked glass display cases, even though the cases were still locked. They'd walk through freezing cold spots where they could see their breath, even in the middle of a hot North Carolina summer. The hair on the back of their necks would stand up for no reason. It happened year after year. Everyone in the department quietly agreed there was something wrong with that place. Then, one winter night, a reserve deputy answered an alarm before Randy arrived. Instead of talking over the radio afterward, he asked Randy to meet him in the parking lot of a small country grocery store. This wasn't someone who easily rattled. His full-time job was flying massive cargo jets. He'd spent his entire adult life as a professional pilot and volunteered as a deputy because it had always been his dream. When Randy saw him, he looked genuinely shaken. The deputy finally asked, "Have you ever seen anything at that mansion?" Randy mentioned the moving dolls, the cold spots, and the unexplained alarms. The deputy shook his head. "No, I mean someone." He explained that as he stepped out of his patrol car, he looked toward the third floor. Standing in the window was a girl. She was about 12 or 13 years old. She was holding the curtain open with one hand and simply staring at him. She never moved. She never reacted. After what felt like forever, she slowly stepped backwards into the darkness and closed the curtain. After that night, he avoided responding to alarms there whenever he could. About 2 years later, it was Randy's turn. Around 2 in the morning, another motion alarm on the third floor. Just another routine call. He pulled into the driveway, switched on his bright alley light, and slowly circled the mansion, scanning every window with his flashlight. As his light climbed to the third floor, he froze. There she was, standing in the second window. A young girl with long wavy hair, wearing what looked like an early 1900s dress trimmed with rows of lace and ruffles. Her right hand held the curtain open about a foot. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't blinking. She was just staring directly at him. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. Then, she quietly stepped backward into the darkness. The curtain gently swayed where she'd let it go. Randy said a chill ran straight up his spine. He searched the mansion because it was his job. He searched it quickly. He found nothing. For years, he never told anyone what he'd seen. Eventually, he admitted it to the same reserve deputy. Before Randy could finish describing her, the deputy already knew exactly who he was talking about. The dress, the curtain, the silent stare from the third floor window. Over the years, other deputies reported seeing the same girl, always in the third floor window, never smiling, never waving, just watching, until she'd stepped back into the darkness and disappeared. Possible explanations? Some believe the deputies experienced little more than shadows, reflections, or the power of suggestion after years of hearing stories about the mansion. Others point to the psychic's claim that someone may have once been confined in that upstairs room, especially considering the unusual locks found on the outside of both the doors and the windows. Randy says the story is completely true, even though he knows many people probably wouldn't admit to an experience like this. He retired from the sheriff's office in 2015, and in all the years after that night, he never saw the girl again. It was the only time she ever revealed herself to him. According to Randy, the sheriff's office still responds to alarm calls at the museum today, and many of those calls continue to be unexplained motion alarms coming from the second or third floor. As with all the stories shared on this channel, this is Randy's personal account, told as he remembers it. Whether there's a logical explanation or something else entirely is up to you to decide. If multiple deputies years apart all described seeing the same girl in the third floor window. What do you think they experienced? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and I'll be sharing a link to this video with Randy. Thank you so much for staying with me till the end. If you enjoyed tonight's stories, I'd really appreciate it if you'd like the video, subscribe, leave a comment below. Let me know which story stayed with you the longest, or if you've ever experienced something you still can't explain. If you have a true, strange, or paranormal experience you'd like to share, I'd love to hear it. Your story could be featured in a future episode. As always, the stories shared on this channel are presented for entertainment and discussion. They are personal accounts submitted by the people who experienced them and are shared as they're remembered by them. While I do my best to present each story faithfully, I can't independently verify the events described, and I encourage everyone to keep an open but thoughtful mind. Until next time, stay curious, and if the woods start calling your name, don't answer.